Oh, there's yeah, we're just dealing with issues, hey. People have challenges, but there's always opportunity. That's the most amazing thing.
Yeah, and also South Africa is very resilient, like for the English and the Americans and the Europeans. I mean, this crisis is a once in a lifetime. I mean, we've had these crises since Sharpeville in 1967,
59, wasn't it? 61.
67, Sharpeville, yeah, early 60s, you're right. But I'm saying that we've had these crises all our lives. I mean, we're much more resilient. Much more.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. And Zev, thank you to you. To have you is a real honor. You're not only, Zev's not only an accomplished businessman, but I think his biggest contribution is what he does for the community, for the Jewish community here and abroad. And I think it's safe to say that Zev can pick up the phone and he can call a cabinet minister, he can call the president, he can even call the Prime Minister of Israel and many, many others. And to have such a relationship with so many people and doing so many things for the community has to be the biggest contribution that you have made. And you just do it in such a humble manner. And I always love listening to you here and hear what you have to say. So Zev, we're going through Pirkei Avos at the moment, Chapters of Our Fathers. It's that book in Jewish law that teaches you how to be a mensch. And as you know, Jewish law covers every aspect of life. From the moment you're born to the moment a person passes away, from the moment you get up in the morning till you go to sleep at night, there's a law covering how you should behave. But there's also one section called Pirkei Avos that teaches you how to better your character. And we're busy going through it at the moment. And one of the sections, and that's why we wanted you to speak, in chapter 1, Mishnah 10, Shmaya says as follows. He says, number one, a person should love to work. Love work, even if you don't need to work, love working in yourself, love working on with other people. Hate high position. If you need to take it, but don't seek it. And don't become too well known to the government. That's in chapter 1. In chapter 2, Mishnah 3, Gamliel used to say as follows. He says, have you Zahirin Bereshus, right? Be wary of those in power. In other words, he's speaking about a communal leader, somebody like yourself who has to interact with the government. And he says, however much you have to fraternize with him, however much you have to deal with him, at the same time, be cautious. So number one, we want to hear a little bit from you about your dealings with our local government and abroad. We'd like to hear from you how you see South Africa and the world in the year ahead, and just some positive, good advice for us, which you're certainly qualified to give. So thank you for making the time.
First of all, thank you, Rabbi. And big shukar to you and Chabad locally and Chabad internationally. I think it just does unbelievable work for world Jewry, for South African Jewry, and just keep up the great work. And it's always a privilege and a pleasure to be a part of it. So, first of all, there's nothing more sacred than Jewish life and life itself. And part of that is protecting what we have. So my obsession is to protect Jewish life, Jewish way of life, and how we proceed. Look, I mean, when Pirkei Avos was, it was written, and that it was very different times. We're very privileged. We live in an era where there's a state of Israel, where there's a Jewish state, which at the end of the day gives us unbelievable comfort and allows us to interact with government very differently to, let's say, our predecessors who had to, as the Jewish Board of Deputies, it was created over 100 years ago to protect South African Jewry when we were coming off the boats from Lithuania and other parts of Eastern Europe. I'm privileged. I can stand up to the South African government. We live in a constitutional democracy. We're not scared of any government. We're proud citizens. We add unbelievable value. And we're proud of our love for the Torah. We're proud of our love for Jewish, for the Jewish heritage, for our Jewish religion. And we're proud of our love for the state of Israel. And we're never going to undermine that. And I think for me, where I come from is you can either moan and you can, sit at the Shabbos table and say how everything terrible is, or you can be a part of the solution. And I've always tried to be part of the solution. And, people often say, well, why do you do this? Or why do you get involved? Why do you spend so much time, so much effort? And I always say, I believe the South African Jewish community is worth it. It's a community unique in the world. It's hospitality, it's commitment, it's achdut, it's unity between from Dati to Chilani to Lubavitch to religious Zionists to ultra-Orthodox. We all one. We all see that importance. And that we're unique in that way. And for me, that's my obsession. My obsession is we're a fruit salad. We must be proud of who we are, but we must be proud of the whole. And South African, especially the modern South Africa, especially the democratically elected South Africa of 1994, has allowed us to thrive. So I've been very privileged and proud to represent this community to the South African government, to the Israeli government, and to world Jewry, to the American government, to the Lithuanian, to the Russian. It's a great community worth fighting for. Look, South Africa is complicated. The ANC has been a lifelong partner with the PLO. In the times of the apartheid government, the Israeli government was close to the apartheid government, and that's a discussion to have. And the PLO and the ANC were being trained by the Cubans and the Russians under communist Russia. So we have a legacy of that, which is complicated. The sad thing for me is Israel was an unbelievable partner to the ANC up until the 60s and early 70s. I mean, when Mandela wanted to leave this country in the 60s, the only airline that would let him go was actually El Al. El Al took him. So, I mean, history has been distorted, but we're dealing with that history, which isn't simple. We're dealing with a lot of people who are against Israel or anti-Semitic. So you can either choose to put your hands in the air, or you can choose to engage. And I've always believed in engaging. Africa and South Africa has been unbelievably good to Jewish South Africans. As the Lubavitch Rebbe always said, South Africa will be good to its Jews until the Mashiach and after Mashiach. So, I do believe in that. I believe that the African continent, there's never been a pogrom. We've never had a major anti-Semitic event of a death or a murder. I mean, America, its last 5 years has been horrific. The levels of anti-Semitism. Canada today is having almost 12 incidents a day. I mean, Europe, we know what's happening in Europe. And, we get really upset when there's graffiti written on a wall. So it's a very different scenario. We're very proud of how we live. We wear our kippot, we are yarmulkes, whether we going to a rugby match in Pretoria and Loftus, or whether we go to a soccer game in Ellis Park or Soccer City in Soweto. We're very proud, and it's easy to live as a Jew in South Africa. So the complexity is the ANC's government's relationship with the PLO, with the Palestinian in their struggle, and they believe the struggles are linked. We see history very differently, and it's a continuous discussion and education. And as I said, for me as a South African, I'm a very proud South African. I love South Africa. I think it's an unbelievable country. I think it's been an unbelievable country. It's been unbelievable to its Jewish community, pre and post apartheid. Whether it's we have thrived. We have thrived as a community, and we still do. And there's very few issues that are Jewish issues that aren't South African issues. So so we all watch Zondo today and see what our president. But just that our president is going to a corruption commission and have to be, and he's talking as the president of the country. A lot of countries in the world that will never happen, or we'll never see that happen. So I see it as a positive. I see it as a great success story. And as I said, under the apartheid, my predecessors had it much harder. They had to work for the protection of South African Jewry in a very complex scenario. For me, it's not complex. If the South African government's out of line, we'll tell them. I mean, currently we're having quite a big dispute with the JSE, over how Jewish candidates have been treated in front of the judiciary for appointments. It was Judge Untholt and it was Advocate Lever, and their question.
Please elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I mean, there were two lines of questioning. So the JSC is the body that will appoint or will put forward names that the president needs to appoint to the judiciary, whether it's the Supreme Court or Appellate Division or Constitutional Court. And the questioning was very concerning. I mean, Advocate Lever was asked if he keeps the Shabbos and how that would affect him being a judge. And Judge Untalt was asked if he's part of the Board of Deputies, which he was part of, or whether what's his view on Israel and the Palestinian, and does he support the two-state solution? And for us, as the advocate body to protect Salvation jury and Jewish way of life, was those questionings weren't asked to the Muslim judges, or weren't asked to the Muslim candidates, or weren't asked to the Christian candidates. If you're a devout Muslim, where are you going to be on Friday afternoons? Will you be? No one was asked that. So that is concerning. And, Salvation jury, from Chief Justice Arthur Taskelson to a Constitutional Court Judge L.B. Sachs to Judge Kenneth Davis to Judge Zulman, who was a Appellate Division judge who was the founder of the Equality Court, a concern. And we then have to fight for that. And that's what that's the body's nature. And we're not going to be scared, and we're not going to do it without prejudice or fear of the authority. And that's the beauty. South African jury live in a constitutional democracy. And, when I have to have a fight with the minister, and we've fought many ministers, I go to bed feeling safe at night. Not that I'm scared that the security branch of the government are going to come and take me or my children out and disappear for 90 days, which happened to people who fought apartheid, in the horrific days. So we're privileged. We do have a constitution. We do have independent courts. We do have a free press. But we need to fight. We need to fight. There's anti-Semitism. There's people on the left and the right who will always hate jury or always hate Jews. And, you have to fight them head on. And then you've got a lot of people who don't fully understand the Jewish community or the Jewish heritage. And there's a certain level of misunderstanding, which then you have to build those bridges. So I believe in building bridges. I'm not scared of a fight. I'm not scared of going legal. I'm not scared of, we've taken matters all the way to the Constitutional Court before. We currently at the Constitutional Court to the guy Bongani Masuku, who was the head of international relations of COSATU, and we're not scared. And you can never be scared. You can never be scared of your heritage, of your Judaism, of being proud to be a Jew. We come from Eastern European heritage, where we know how hard it was for our grandparents to live in those horrible times. And as I said, our two factors: we do live in Africa, which we've never had that level of anti-Semitism ever explode on this continent. And we live in an era of a state of Israel, where there's a Jewish state, where there's a slither of land, where the United Nations gave the modern United Nations gave world jury the right to live in the biblical homeland as a democracy, as a freedom. And those two things allow us to live as very proud South African jury. And, I hear what Pierre Cavot said, and I do understand it. And as we were discussing earlier, the great redemption of the Jewish people, is Purim, and it's what Mordechai does in Iran. It's Persia. And
but please elaborate on the story of his involvement, etc.
So, Mordechai, everyone knows the story of Esther and Mordechai's role in getting Esther to marry Achashverosh. And, we never asked any South African juries to marry President Zuma or be one of his wives. So we've never gone to that level of, what Mordechai did. But it was a very different time. It was a very important era. But what it does show, it shows the importance of engaging. And Mordechai goes against a lot of advisors, a lot of jury, which were just praying and, hoping for, I don't know, some. And, Hashem helps those who help themselves. And he decided, and with Queen Esther, and he says to Queen Esther, he says, if you don't go to Achashverosh, someone else will save the Jewish people, because that's the covenant of the Jewish people and Hashem. But you have been chosen to be that savior. And that's when she goes to him. And then he stays in Achashverosh's government up until the end. And at the end of the Megillah, it says, and most Jews were happy with him. We had the discussion. I've always said, even the greatest savior of the Jewish people of the time, and he does say world Jewry, not South African Jewry, he says world Jewry, not every Jew supported him. And, that's the Jewish people. And to be honest, I love that about the Jewish people. If we all sat in line and we all agreed with what the board of deputies did, or what, Chabad did, or what the Israeli government did, well, then we're not a great people that we really are. The beauty of world Jewry and South African Jews, we have different opinions, and we don't always support each other. We don't always agree with each other. But what I do ask is that we always recognize and appreciate what each other does and the importance of the unity. And that's really what I fight for.
But in working with the government, have you found them receptive? Have you found them open to you, or has it been an uphill battle?
So, it's a good question. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And there's whether it's across religious lines, it's across racial lines, you'll come across people who are actually, they're anti-Semites. They hate us. I do believe anti-Semitism is a form of bigotry, hatred, and racism. And I promise you, if they're hating Jews, they're hating other minorities, they haven't got time for people that are different to them. It's called the hatred of the other. And sometimes you'll go into a meeting and whatever, you can just see that the person actually, I've had meetings with very, very powerful people where they don't even want to have a picture with us, so we know where they stand, and, you're either going to, we're not scared of you, and you're either going to work with us, or they're going to be a certain level of consequences locally and internationally. And those consequences is we're very blessed. We live in a time with a powerful American Jewry, a very powerful Jewish state in Israel, and we work as a unity. So, we as South African Jewry want South Africa to get better. We want unemployment to come down. I'm committed to seeing every South African come out of economic poverty. I'm committed to see South Africans not only having political freedom, but economic freedom. But that can't come at the expense of any minority, whether it's white, whether it's Jewish, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Indian, whether it's any ethnic, whether it's, for that matter, fellow Africans who have come here for a better life. Because, my late Zayda tried to get to America for a better life, and he was kicked out. So, we have to feel for refugees. We have to feel for the other people who what we were, in a time when the world didn't look after us. So my interaction with the ANC, with the EFF, with the DA, with across the board has been unbelievably encouraging, where we might have differences, but as South Africans, we can discuss, we can talk, we can agree to disagree, and we can agree to meet the next time. So I've had very few meetings where have been hostile, and we have had them. And, you can see the history if you Google me, the ones we have had to have big fights with. And we're not scared. We're not scared of having those fights. And we'll stand up for South African Jewry when we believe the government or a specific minister or specific deputy minister or a specific leader of a political party goes for us. We're not scared to go for them. And we're not scared to use any legal means to show where I've been unbelievably, what's the word I'm looking for? Where I've been so overwhelmed is civil society of South Africa. Civil society has never let us down across black, white, Indian, colored, across racial lines, across ethnic lines, and across religious lines. The level of unacceptable behavior. And we as a community need to understand that if we want the rest of society to protect us, we have to protect the rest of society. and we're all interlinked, So, South Africa, you can have as many discussions as you want how terrible it is, and I see it very differently. And we live in a country that has some of the lowest levels of anti-Semitism. And yes, crime is on the increase. Yes, we've got unemployment. Yes, we've got poverty. We've got major issues. I don't shy away from them. But we do have to add unbelievable value to South Africa. We have to add unbelievable value as white South Africans who did enjoy the privileges of the past as white South Africans. But then, well, what's amazing for me is how many Jews fought that struggle. And we have a commitment to ourselves and our fellow South Africans. So, yeah, I mean, if I have to tell you with my interactions, if I've come across 5 pure anti-Semites who have a true hatred for us, it's a lot. And we're not scared of them, and we're not going to back away from them. But the vast majority, and I can tell you, I've been dealing from President Mbeki, President Malanta, President Zuma, President Ramaphosa. We have had unbelievable interactions who have felt for the Jewish community and have understood it. And, for that, and my predecessors had that with President Mandela, and they had that with President de Klerk. So I can't go further back than that. But
you're working with the highest office. Have you been overwhelmed at their support?
Absolutely, we work with the highest office on both sides. Look, one of my biggest complexities I have is, it's a bit like in a divorced family where the mother doesn't talk to the father. One of the most difficult parts I have as a South African Zionist Jew, or South African Jewish Zionist, is the South African government's got very little time for Israel, and the Israeli government's got very little time for the South African government, which makes it very complex. It makes it complex for us because we love the Jewish state. We believe it's 100% legitimate. There's issues in Israel. There's issues with the Israeli government. You can criticize them, but the fundamental is very, very important to our survival and to our religious belief, to our tribal belief. And the South African government and the Israeli government haven't seen each other for a long time. And for me, that's the pity. And for me, that's what I'd love to see. If I could see any difference, and if I could make any slight difference, is to go. I mean, the last time there was a proper ministerial visit between Israel and South Africa in the mid-2000s was Minister Pashwa under Olmert, under Mbeki's era, which I was part of that delegation. And we've never seen that level of cooperation. And I really do hope that we see it sooner than later, because I think that's one of the subconscious reasons why a lot of South African Jewry, although they have an unbelievable life, aren't feeling as comfortable as they should. And that's because we would really like the Jewish state and our government, the South African government, to have closer relations.
But at what level is that being held up?
So that's definitely because of, as I said, it's an ANC historical relationship with the PLO, with their view that they see Israel very differently as we do. They see Israel as a stumbling block to peace. We see it differently. We see it complexed. I do believe sometimes the Israeli governments have tried unbelievably hard to make peace. Sometimes they haven't. But as South African, as the ANC, you should continuously encourage people to talk. South Africa got a peaceful resolution in 1994. Not because we carried on the fight, but we basically we understood the importance of two oppositions. They were the ultimate enemies. I mean, your ANC and your National Party were the ultimate enemies, and they came together for the good of South Africa and for the good of living in unity. And I really do hope. I do hope one day the South African government, will start seeing the importance of what Israel can do to help South Africans and normal South Africans. And it doesn't mean you have to give up on your support for the rights of the Palestinians or the rights of the Palestinians to have their state. I think the two are very much, you can have the two. But I think that's our biggest challenge as a local Jewish community.
But has the Abraham Accords and the change of policy between major Arab countries affected things? I mean,
So it's a very good question. I mean, today I must say I've got very good relationships with the UAE ambassador, and things are really moving. And I mean that you have to give credit to the American administration and the Israeli government, and for that matter, the Gulf states. It's very interesting. I mean, the Abraham Accords. I mean, the South African government, the ANC government, doesn't give the level of support I would have liked to have seen. I would have liked to have believed they would have been in the forefront and had, said, this is amazing and we want to be a part of it and all the rest of it. And we didn't see that. So it's a little bit disappointing. It doesn't always go how we want it. But as I said, my job isn't to make friends with friends. My job is to try and make friends with enemies or friends with people who misunderstand how we see things or misinterpreted things. I don't want to say misunderstand. So I would have liked to have seen a more warm reception. I was very upset that South Africa and the South African government's almost they've almost given up their role of being a peacemaker and a bridge in the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The Israeli-Arab issue is almost over. I mean, that conflict. If you had told me 5 years ago we'd be talking about this, I would have pinched myself. So, and that is, you have to give the credit to the Americans, you have to give credit to the Israelis, and you have to give credit to the UAE and the Gulf states. I mean, they it was almost an intractable thing. And all of those countries, the Americans, the Gulf states, haven't given up on the finding a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. I'd like to see the South African government play a more constructive role in ending that level of conflict.
Talk to us about Israel and Iran at the moment and how you see things there. And while you're at it, if you could go on to the situation with the Israeli elections.
So, look, Iran is definitely Israel's biggest existential threat. The question is, how do you deal with Iran? You've got two forms. The one is to, put as much pressure on possible. The other one is if you give them a way out, they'll delay it, or you can monitor and check them. And, I've always said I would really like to believe that Israel and the Israeli government and the American government are a lot closer to making sure that Iran doesn't go nuclear. I think a nuclear Iran would be an existential threat for Israel. And I do believe that it's a very, very dangerous. I don't think it's only Israel that has to worry about a nuclear weaponized Iran. I think the rest of the Gulf states have to worry, and I think Europe, and for that matter, America. So I am very concerned as a global citizen that if Iran does go nuclear, there are major consequences going forward. And can I add any help or value? I can't on that one. Our value as a white South African, I saw when the world turned against South Africa on a legitimate reason. And for me, I'm obsessed about making sure that the world doesn't turn against Israel for an illegitimate reason. And as I said, you can criticize the Israeli government. They don't always do things right. They don't always manage the correct situation. And sometimes I'll disagree with certain policies. I will never, for me, I support the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish democracy in their biblical homeland. And that's, for me, where diaspora journeys come in. So I'd like to believe with the Iran issue between Israel and America and the European Union and Russia, that they will come to some level of understanding that a nuclear weaponized Iran is not good for Israel, but it's not good for the rest of the Gulf states. It's not good for Europe. It's not good for the world. So how you stop that, it's above my pay grade. I'm a Jewish South African on the tip of Africa. And I think it would be a very sad day for world peace, for Middle East peace, and particularly for the right to exist as a Jewish state in our biblical homeland. So that does concern me. On the Israeli elections, I'm not going to comment on my personal views, but I do think what is amazing with Israel is, they haven't had a stable government in, almost 8-9 years. And it just keeps flying, Israel. Israel's just it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's coalitions on coalitions. Everyone's discussing Bibi. I mean, as I often tell the South African government, Bibi's never got more than 25% of the Israeli vote. And somehow Israel, through its people, through its technocrats, through its brilliance, through its its startup nation way of thinking, is just flying. And for me, the exciting part of Israel is, I've seen it. I mean, I'm 48 years old, and I remember, Israel went to the peace table in 1993 for, that was Shamir's time during the Madrid conference. It was for a $10 billion loan, $10 billion loan, $10 billion loan guarantee from the Americans. That's what pushed Israel to go there. We can have a discussion if it was right or wrong, but that was Israel's vulnerability. For $10 billion in 1993, they basically, had to go to the Madrid conference. I mean, today, not that Israel only vaccinate, it's the first Western country to vaccinate with approved vaccines its own population. But it's just an unbelievable country that has, I mean, all its diplomats, everyone throughout the world, flew them back, got them Pfizer vaccine, flew them back 3 weeks later. It's just a country that's an OECD country. It's got one of the greatest lifestyles. It's got a happiness population, in the top 12. And yes, there are issues, and yes, some not having a stable government, and what we just saw happen with the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General doesn't make us feel comfortable that they're not issues. But for me, as I said, seeing President Ramaphosa at the Zonda Commission is as exciting as seeing the Prime Minister of Israel U-turn on his Justice Minister because it's going to the Supreme Court in Israel. So I see it as a good thing. I see it as a positive. I see these checks and balances, and that's what excites me. It excites me to see that there are checks and balances to anyone in power. And I do believe if you go back into biblical times, with every king there were prophets. For every there were Navim. There was checks and balances. And I do think in a modern day, yes, we'd love the time of Mashiach. We'd love things to be simple. We'd love things for Hashem to tell us what we need. But in those times, I do believe in Israel, in South Africa, as Jews living in the two countries, there's checks and balances. And for that matter, whether it's in America or whether there's other parts of the world, there are checks and balances. And I see it as a positive. You can throw up your hands and say, geez, what's happened this last week in Israel's it's a disaster. The country's going to anarchy. Or you can say, well, it's just unbelievable bad that there are checks and balances to any form of power, whether you agree or whether you support the Prime Minister or you don't. So, I think it's wonderful to see that level of checks and balances to any power.
What do you say about the polarization in America? In this, how do you see the situation?
So look, that really does worry me. It really does worry me. I think for me personally, who's obsessed about living with the other, whether you like them or dislike them, I am worried about America. I'm worried about this hatred of the other. I'm worried about the hatred of the other American. I mean, that it's been cut so deep between whether how the Democrats, their dislike for Republicans or Republicans' dislike for Democrats does worry me. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. I do believe as as someone who's always seen America as a light, as protecting world democracy and corporate governance, and the first time in the history where the Jewish state or the Jewish people and the world superpower actually on the same team. When you go from the first temple, the second temple, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, the Germans, we can go through it. We have lived in a privileged era where world Jewry and the Jewish state and the world superpower, being America, are very aligned. And I do worry. I worry about America. I'd like to believe that America's going to start seeing themselves again. And I mean, as someone who manages anti-Semitism, I do worry. I worry about the attacks happening in New York to Jewish schools, to Jews, it does worry me. It does worry me. And I really hope America can bring itself back from hating each other more than hating external enemies, and understanding that, same as in South Africa, no one's going away. You can love or hate the EFF, you can love or hate the Afrikaners, you can love or hate the black people. None of us are going anywhere. So we better start enjoying and living with each other for the good of South Africa. And I do hope American jury and Americans will start seeing the importance of, even if you disagree with each other politically, you can still work together as Americans, and you stop hating each other more than real threats that are threatening your country or threatening democracy and freedom of speech and the ability to live as proud Americans, or for that matter, proud Jews, and living from fear and faith, from fear. I must say what scares me throughout the world is the attack on Asians. I mean, as horrific as this pandemic, and it did start from China, and China's behavior wasn't what it should have been, and I do believe it could have been stopped earlier. We wouldn't live in this pandemic. You can't start hating every Chinese or every Asian just because I mean, we live that. We as Jews understand that, and we have to always understand where we've come from. And our people, have hated us for stuff that it's got nothing to do with us. So it does concern me. I think the attack on worldwide Asians is a concern. And we as Jews need to feel for every I don't want to say minority, because I mean there's many more Asians in the world than, let's say, white Westerners, if you want to call it. But it's just not acceptable how they behave, and we have to feel for it, because as Jewish people, we have to have a Jewish soul to understand what we went through and what our ancestors went through. And we can't allow anyone to go through that level of hatred, and it's just not acceptable. You can hate an individual for bad behavior. You can't hate the people for an individual behavior.
Just coming back, before we're running out of time, but just coming back to something that you said. When I grew up, America was like the policeman of the world. You felt like they were controlling the world, the moral compass. Are they still that? Does the world perceive them as that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think the moment America doesn't become that, America, came into World War I in the 11th hour. They were very unhappy how the Europeans behaved, and then they went to isolationism. And when America retreats from the world, we got Nazi Germany, we got crazy Japan, we got and people must remember both of those. As horrific as Nazi Germany was to us as Jewry, if you see what happened to Japan and how Japan militarized and what they did to the Chinese and how they behaved, that's when America moves away. And I mean, it's not for me to discuss, because I'm not an American, and I'm not sending my American troops into the Middle East or into Europe or onto bases. But the reason we have lived as a world, and really we've had since the Second World War, we've had the most peaceful period in world history. It's because of America's, and America doesn't get it always right, and America doesn't always do the right thing. But what America does do is truly.
I just want to apologize that my internet went off for a minute. Okay.
No problem. So I'm just saying that with America it's a country that has got a moral compass. And I mean, I've spoken to Israeli F-16 fighter pilots, and when they deal with American military and air force, they believe it's a moral country. They believe it's got a moral, it's got an ethical basis to it. And for me, I would hate to see that go. I am concerned. I do think the rise of China as a world citizen is a concern. You can say what you want about China, you can love or hate them, but it's not a democracy, it's not a freedom of press. It lives a very different society to how we, as South African Jews, as Jewry in the world, we know the importance of freedom and democracy and the right to speak. And if America turns away from its obligation, whether they like it or not, and I often say America is the first superpower in the history of man where its people have chosen it to be a superpower. It wasn't the Romans which it was emperors and all the rest of it decided to become. America chose from its democracy to become the great superpower of the world. And I really do hope, my biggest two prayers is that the Jewish state and the giant of democracy work hand in hand, and that's why we have the lives we live. And I really do hope that America keeps its moral and ethical obligation to not only its own people but to all world to all world human beings, because I think they've done a sterling job. The word policeman is a bit hard, and I know we like to use it, but I'd like to believe that they kept everyone, that they didn't allow bullies on the playing field. They didn't allow bullies on the school field.
The mission also says, pray for those people in power, because if not for governments, man would eat up other men alive like fish.
Absolutely. So I mean, that's I mean, as I said, my interaction with the EFF and Julius Malema, the president of the EFF, he's always said they the counterbalance to anarchy, whether you agree or disagree. Unfortunately, with man, with government, with independent courts, that's what makes us survive. So look, we've lived in a privileged era. I mean, world jury, South African jury, very sadly or not sadly, I mean, the Holocaust is, the survivors of the Holocaust are dying out. I mean, it's really a long time. And what we have to realize is it could happen again. There's everything, it can never happen again. Because we've seen other massacres, we've seen other genocides. I mean, whether it was Rwanda or whether what's happening in certain parts of the world today. So we must never think it can't happen, but we as world jury and as the world must try everything in its power not to. And we can't be scared of government when you're living in a democracy. There's certain parts of the world you can't. Certain Jewish communities can't stand up to the government. In the Venezuelan Jewish community have it very tough. We don't have it there. We're far from that. And we'll keep standing up and protecting all South African Jews.
We're running out of time. I want you to give us some practical, a man in your position, both from a businessman and a communal leader and a real communal leader. I want you to sum up by giving everybody watching this, the entire Jewish community, your advice of what we should be doing on a daily basis to better ourselves in this country.
I think it's very much what you always do. You want to make a better world, whether you want to add value, you want to add, well, whatever, it's the ripple effect. You drop a little stone. I mean, I don't have to tell you, Rabbi. I mean, this is what you've built your whole foundation on.
If we want to hear from you.
Yeah, but I'm saying we talk the same language. I think every person talking, Jewish or non-Jewish, you need to leave this world knowing you've made it better than when you arrived. And for me, that's about interaction with your own tribe, your own community, your own religion, and then your fellow world citizen, whether it's a happy thank you, whether it's, it was Chief Rabbi Harris always said, South Africa is a country where you need small change in your pocket, because you're going to have to give to people on the side of the road. You're going to have to give people less fortunate. And I just feel that, I saw a very unbelievable, a random act of kindness, which is always what you always preach. I was at a robot last night at Santon, and there was a beggar there, on the corner. And there was this big white Afrikaans guy with tattoos. And I saw him coming towards the beggar, and I thought, oh, this is going to end badly. And now you're not sure what you should do. Should you leave? Should you? No, I thought, I better just make sure what happens. And he went to give him a meal. He had bought sandwiches at the local shop, and that gave me unbelievable hope in South Africa. There was this white big Afrikaans, 4 ways hard Eddie, as we call them, and there he was giving this black beggar, he had nothing, out of the goodness of his heart. And I do believe that's how we're going to change the world. It's one act of kindness every single day, and that's what you do, and that's why I so support you and your initiatives, because that's how we change the world, with one act of random kindness. I mean,
I must say, this is the most beautiful story I've heard. Beautiful. When did that happen? Last night?
Yeah, it happened last night. I was actually on the phone to Irina, my girlfriend. I said, I think I'm going to get involved, yeah. And I couldn't get over. I really thought I was going to have to get out my car and protect this poor beggar, because I just thought this guy was going to come and hurt him. And I mean, all of a sudden, he comes with this little packet of food he had bought at the Shell. It was still in the Shell packet. And he gave to give it to him. And for me, you know, that was an act of random kindness. I promise you, no one else saw it. It was probably 10:30 at night. And it was just, you know, if everyone could do that, we've got a better place. And I don't want us to think that we haven't got that, because the majority of the world, the majority of Hashem's people do that. But we always obsess about the minorities that start war, that cause conflict, that cause, you know, because unfortunately that makes the news. Nowhere in the news are you going to hear about this big white Afrikaans guy. Well, I think he's Afrikaans. It could have been English, but with big tattoos, big muscles, short at 10:30, coming to give a beggar. And for me, that's where we have to. That's what we all have to do, and that's the little thing we have to do.
Absolutely. We're out of time. I just want to read one more Mishnah to you. It's from chapter 2, Mishnah 2, and it says as follows: anybody who works for the community, should do it for the sake of heaven. And I must tell you, you are an embodiment of that. We want to thank you for everything that you do for everybody. And please, God should give you the miraculous touch that whatever you do should have success. Thank you for making the time, Zev.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you.